Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, if you follow my trades and you want to trade Swiss franc, it's time to place an order to sell short at 188.95. Okay, put a place to sell short at 188.895. Let's see and wait. We almost there. Let's move a little bit lower to 90. Actually, doesn't let me right now move lower. So we'll still waiting for order execution to execute this order. Okay, position opened. It's a short position on Swiss franc, 0.88895. Okay, so all of you guys, just well done. You entered the order, and as you can see, it went straight our way down. So let's see how much we will make from this.
The results are a boost to CEO Rolf Heimers, whose start at the bank has been overshadowed by a probe into money laundering at his former employer.
The capital reserve that we already had and the capital generation of our business model gives us the confidence that we can announce this 4 billion Swiss franc share buyback program for the next 3 years.
The founder of Apollo, Leon Black, is retiring as chief executive over his association with sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Law firm Deckert has found no evidence Black was involved in any of Epstein's criminal activities, but its report says Black paid him $158 million over 5 years, much more than was previously known. Black has apologized for doing business with Epstein, calling it a terrible mistake. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Francine.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Now let's get more with our guest, John Studinsky, Vice Chair of PIMCO. And John, we were doing, around the world in 60 seconds, looking at some of the parts. We were talking about the stimulus in the U.S. and also China. What overall is your take on how, foreign affairs will change and actually maybe change the economy with it in 2021?
Well, I think we're going to go into what some have called, or what I'm calling, the age of multilateralism. Unlike the transactional age, which has come to an end with President Trump, I think there's no question that there's going to be a multilateral approach on trade. But I think the original rapprochement between the United States and China will be through John Kerry and his role as the climate czar, and the Chinese government's focus on E, S, and G, but particularly on E and climate, where they've been very, as you know, very disciplined and very ruthless and dogged about what they do on the climate front. And I think given this year is going to be very much focused on preparing for COP26 in November, I think Kerry and the relationship between what the role Kerry will play between the United States and China is important. I think on trade, though, there's no question. Trump put forth the whole China trade issue and established it as a very firm bipartisan issue, and that is not going to change. No one expects it to change. I think the only difference is when you're dealing with China, as you know, it's best to do things discreetly, quietly, one-on-one. And I think the Biden administration will engage with the Europeans, the European Union, possibly Japan, and have a much more multilateral discussion about trade and trade practices.
John, what does that mean, again, for the markets? Is there something that the markets will latch on to? We talked about higher valuations. What will be the catalyst for maybe markets to rethink what they're looking at?
Well, the equity market, of course, is very focused on the recovery. and it's reading the recovery into it already. And unless something markedly happens to delay the recovery, well into next year, the markets are going to remain well priced. Remember, a lot of the most interesting investments in the equity space in terms of emerging strategies in biotech, tech, batteries, artificial intelligence, Francine, are not just in the United States, but they're in China, Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. So those markets, in terms of innovative technologies and new places for capital, are very important. So that's why having a uniform market and nothing to restrict the flow of capital is important. It's ironic, in one of our very thoughtful leaders in this area, Geraldine Sundstrom, she's very focused on the quality of high tech and healthcare stocks in China, Korea, the United States, and Japan. Ironically, not in Europe.
John, thank you so much. We'll have plenty more, of course, on these big themes. As always, a pleasure to speak to you, John Studinsky, their vice chair at PIMCO. Now, coming up, after a rip-roaring rally that sent GameStop up as much as 145% yesterday, short sellers are doubling down, including one firm newly backed by Ken Griffin and Steve Cohen. We have all of the details next. This is Bloomberg. Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, I believe we have live pictures of Palazzo Chigi, which used to be an old noble palace in Rome, which is now the seat of the Council of Ministers and the official residence of the Prime Minister of Italy. Of course, the tenant of Palazzo Chigi is Giuseppe Conte, where there's a pack of press you can see there. I've doorstepped him many times at that exact place, but we know that Giuseppe Conte will resign today, so he should leave Palazzo Chigi very shortly to then go to the president, Sergio Mattarella, asking him that he will formally step down, but then try and maneuver for a return at the head of a new government. So we'll, of course, keep an eye on Italian politics. Now, thanks to Reddit users, GameStop shares had a gigantic day, at one point rallying as much as 145% before paring some of those gains. GameStop wasn't the only one. Shares from BlackBerry to U.S. retailer Express also saw big surges. Now, joining us to discuss all of this is Bloomberg's Danny Berger. Danny, good morning. Why exactly did these stocks see this massive surge that we saw?
Francine, it really shows how this trade that originates on Reddit forums and snowballs from there really has an effect on the market itself. Not just in the U.S., I should say. We've seen Nokia shares also rally over the past 2 days because it was mentioned on a Reddit forum as well. This sort of YOLO trade that's perhaps best explained by the rocket ship emoji, or as Tracy Alloway says, flows before pros. In other words, the fundamentals don't matter. As long as you get this flow in from Reddit users, it can beat out the fundamentals. The fundamental picture, I should say, had been somewhat captured by short sellers in the most recent days. This blue line here is short interest. And so in sort of a way of going against the establishment, or at least that's how Reddit users had framed it, they decide to go in and buy a bunch of call options, which tends to be the favorite among this Robinhood type retail trade. So what you get is this now technical picture where you have the dealers on the other side of the call option who need to hedge, so they need to buy shares. And then you have a short squeeze as well, which only goes further to up the price too, as they have to abandon their shorts as they're seeing increased fees to borrowing. So you get this effect where it just really snowballs as the price picks up. And GameStop's not the only stock we've seen this happen to, Francine.
Thank you so much, our Danny Berger there with the very latest on some of these short sellers. Now, we'll have plenty more, of course, on that story throughout the day with Danny Berger. Also coming up, we talk Italian politics. Giuseppe Conte currently on his way to see Italy's president to offer his resignation. Of course, the Italian prime minister planning to come back with a third coalition. We'll see if he manages. Certainly, we'll discuss it next. This is Bloomberg.
another day of risk off across the financial markets. We bring you special coverage of all the price action and implications here on Bloomberg Television.
I was actually poor.
No foreplay?
Eat your bag of Lay's with a smile on your face.
If all the diseases have been taken, I'll take a tax.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News. Here's Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Francine. President Joe Biden says he's ready to negotiate on stimulus, calling for a bipartisan deal. The White House is open to reshaping its $1.9 trillion plan, but the president says time is of the essence for a new aid package. Republicans have rejected the price tag as too big too soon after last month's $900 billion bill. Now, the House of Representatives has triggered the start of the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump, sending the single article across the Senate. Arguments will get underway the week of February the 8th. According to a statement, the former president is setting up an office to, quote, carry on the agenda of his administration. And Barcelona has kept its spot as Europe's top-earning football club, but that's only by a whisker. The Spanish team ended its first season in more than a decade without a trophy, and according to Deloitte, it saw revenue drop by more than 100 million euros. Second on the leaderboard were rivals Real Madrid. Now, the highest-earning English team is still Manchester United. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Francine.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Now let's get more on the breaking news from Italy. Giuseppe Conte is currently on his way to see the country's president to offer his resignation. The Italian prime minister is quitting, avoiding a damaging defeat in the Senate. Now, according to unnamed officials, Conte is also expected to then be asked to take another shot at putting together a third coalition government. Now, joining us this morning is Fabrizio Pagani. He's global head of economics and capital market strategy at Muzinich. Fabrizio, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Now, there are a number of diagrams that we need to look at, and Italian politics for non-Italians is something of a blur. What are the chances that the Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, once he hands his resignation, then is able to form a new government?
Well, I would say that at this moment, it's probably the most likely scenario. But the crisis is in the hand of the head of states. Is the President of the Republic, Sergio Mattarella, who's in the driving seat. His role is not fully understood abroad, but because he has no executive power. But in this type of moments, when there is a collapse of government, he's the one who will do the informal and formal consultation in order to form a new government. And at the end, if a new government is not possible, he will have the power to call new elections. So let's see. In a couple of days, we will know more.
Fabrizio, what does Italy need now? Is it stability, or does it actually need reform so that the recovery fund money can be spent wisely?
I think it needs both. It needs a government which is able to be effective and to be able to fight the pandemic, do the vaccination plan, and to spend the money of the recovery fund in a way which is effective and in particular which includes structural reforms. Italy has an enormous problem of bottlenecks, of key issues which have not been addressed by previous government, and we need to address them now with the resources of the structure of the recovery fund. This point has not been fully understood yet by Italian politicians.
And of course, everything's to play at the moment. But if Giuseppe Conte manages to get a new government in place by getting, a couple of senators here and there, will it be stable enough to push through what Italy needs in 2021? Again, from the outside, this feels like a make-or-break moment, or they either spend the recovery fund wisely, or it gets squandered and it sets Italy back 2-3 years.
Right, you're right. There is a lot at play. There is a lot at play for Italy, but also for Europe. Basically, the reputation and the future of Italy is at stake. But at the same time, is the future of Europe, because Europe has been putting a lot of weight behind this next generation EU, and Italy is a bit the litmus test of it. If Italy fails, basically the whole program of next generation EU fails as well. So indeed, this is a very topical moment, and what Conte or whoever will be at the helm of the government will have enormous responsibility in that sense.
Fabrizio, when you look at some of the concerns on the periphery, if this really was started, let's remind all of our international viewers, by Matteo Renzi saying that he didn't agree with the current government and pulling his support. Can Conte actually give Matteo Renzi what he wants and get on with the reforms to have something that looks a bit more stable? And if we don't get that and we have a technical government, who would be in charge?
I can't answer to the second question, but I can tell you that the country needs this structural reform, which this government and the previous government have not been able to do and to put in place. I mean, reforms of education. Italy is lagging well behind the OECD average in that sense. Reform in labor. For example, women employment is very low in Italy. The famous dichotomy, between career and having children in Italy is not working. It's neither one. Italy has a very low fertility rate, so it's really the worst of both worlds. These issues have to be addressed together with the reform of the public administration, together with the reform of justice, and of course sustainability and all other areas which are more common to other European countries. But there are something very, very typical and specific of Italy is that our baseline of growth is lower than other European countries, and we need, through this structural reform, make this baseline higher and closer to the one of France, closer to the one of Spain.
Fabrizio, if the ECB weren't there, actually holding yields, firm, what would happen to Italian markets in a situation like this?
Well, we have seen some volatility in the last couple of days, but really, really modest. If the ECB weren't there, that volatility would have been much, much higher. Somehow, the BTP and the spread is shielded by the PEP program of the ECB, and not only by the fact that this program is, the ECB is buying now, but also by the fact that we know that the ECB will buy for the next months and until early next year at least. So in that sense, this provides a protection, but also provides the window of opportunity which the government, whichever it is, has in order to make the reform. Once this window is off, there will be no more time, no more resources, and Italy will be again under the stress and the pressure of markets.
Fabrizio, given the current trajectory, where do you see the Italian economy in 6 to 12 months? Could Italy once again become the worst student in the Union?
Well, the GDP of Italy last year in 2020 was already one of the lowest, definitely in the lowest bound. The rebound we will have in 2021 is modest. However, there are signs of vitality, particularly in the manufacturing sector. The backbone, the strength of the Italian economy is medium-sized companies. And these medium-sized companies are doing relatively well. Of course, it depends on the sectors, because we have this, K-shaped recovery. Certain sectors are doing well, others not. But in generally speaking, manufacturing is vital in the country. and they're exporting, they're getting more mature, they're better managed, these companies, they're really growing also in terms of approach to the capital market. There is merger, there is consolidation of industrial sector and so on. So in that sense, we have positive signs. The overall picture, though, remains quite dire because, of course, consumption is very low. We have the whole weight of public debt, and still, as I said, some structural issues which are an obstacle to growth, including the weight of of a very inefficient public administration.
Fabrizio, thanks so much for joining us. Fabrizio Pagani, their Global Head of Economics and Capital Market Strategy at Munich. Now, 2021 is shaping up to be a decade-defining year for global business. Bloomberg's The Year Ahead event brings together leading chief executives and economic heavyweights to map out a strategic blueprint for business. We'll be speaking to the chief executives of Pfizer, Bridgewater, Hilton, and Carnival, as well as a Norwegian Prime Minister. Don't miss that. This is Bloomberg. Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, vaccines aren't proving to be the quick fix remedy that the coronavirus pandemic the world has hoped for. The latest distribution stumble comes from AstraZeneca, with the EU accusing the drug maker of backsliding on its contract. As governments scramble to get as many people vaccinated as possible, President Joe Biden set out an ambitious target for America.
I think it'll be this spring. I think we'll be able to do that this spring. But it's going to be a logistical challenge that exceeds anything we've ever tried in this country. But I think we can do that. I feel confident that by summer we're going to be well on our way to heading toward herd immunity.
Now, in the rush to ramp up vaccinations, more countries are adopting the UK's strategy of delaying the second dose. But the US top infectious disease chief Anthony Fauci warned against the untested method.
You don't get full efficacy until you get that second dose. And if you allow suboptimal efficacy, you could actually immunologically select more for mutations when you do that. So that's the reason why, it may not be the case, but it gets risky. And that's the reason why we prefer to keep it on the time that the clinical trials said.
Now let's get straight to our Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Francine. Novartis shares are falling this morning after its outlook disappointed investors. Sales are expected to grow in the low to mid-single digits, and its forecast is dependent on healthcare returning to normal around the middle of the year. As vaccine rollouts continue, Novartis thinks it will be able to accelerate growth.
We have found a vaccine as an industry, particularly Pfizer and Moderna, but as well AstraZeneca and others, in record pace. And we're rolling that out in really, I think, in a remarkable way when I think you take the long arc of history. It feels a little bumpy right now, but I hope that over the course of this year, as the scale up really happens, people will appreciate the magic of modern medicine and the fact that we could tackle a pandemic in this way.
Now, the founder of Apollo, Leon Black, is retiring as chief executive over his association with notorious sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Law firm Deckert has found no evidence Black was involved in any of Epstein's criminal activities, but its report says Black paid him $158 million over 5 years, more than was previously known. Black has apologized for doing business with Epstein, calling it a terrible mistake. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Francine.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Now, UBS is doubling the size of its share buyback to $4.5 billion. That's after the world's largest wealth manager posted a strong final quarter to close out the year. Bloomberg's Manus Cranney spoke to the lender's new chief executive, Ralph Harmers, about his first results at the helm.
Our business model has been really successful getting through this pandemic, and therefore both the capital reserve that we already had and the capital generation of our business model gives us the confidence that we can announce this 4 billion Swiss franc share buyback program for the next 3 years, of which we will perform more than 1 billion in the first quarter of this year. 2020 has been, and specifically the fourth quarter, has been quite good in terms of provisions. You saw that the 66 million of risk costs is really a combination of some releases, but also a stage 3 provision that we had to take on a particular client related to the travel sector. And now going forward, Manus, the question is really how do the economies get through this pandemic?
Now, the bank's focus on wealthy clients and relatively conservative lending have allowed UBS to sail relatively smoothly through the pandemic so far. But with delays in vaccine rollouts and double-dip recessions on the cards, the light at the end of the tunnel is looking dimmer.
Really, where is this pandemic truly going? On one side, we see the light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine programs really taking off, and therefore we're increasingly confident that that this pandemic will come to an end. On the other side, specifically here in Europe, the lockdowns are more strict than ever, which will have a further deteriorating effect on the economy, on the real economy, and it's really that unpredictability as to how long the pandemic will really take, when the economy can really start off again, and what is then the shape of that economy. I think that's the true risk that we need to see and that we need to manage this year.
Well, the pandemic isn't the only cause for uncertainty at the lender this year. Hammer's overhaul of Switzerland's largest bank has been overshadowed by a Dutch probe into his role in a money laundering scandal at his former employee, ING.
When the investigation started, I fully cooperated at that moment in time. When they start the investigation now, I will again fully cooperate in the investigation. I've always acted with good conscience during my tenure at ING, and therefore I have full confidence in the good outcome of this case. Now, if it comes to my ability to lead UBS, it's clear that I know the case very well. I'm well prepared, so I can really focus on my role as UBS CEO, on UBS, and also on its future.
Now, coming up, France's finance minister warns of the economic fallout from a third lockdown. We'll bring you some of our wide-ranging conversation with Bruno Le Maire next. This is Bloomberg.
Climate change is the defining issue of our time, so we've redefined how we cover it. With clear data and rigorous journalism, we rise to the scale of the challenge to reveal the breadth of possibility. We look at stories from every angle to provoke debate, spotlight solutions, and make sense of the greatest crisis of our generation. Bloomberg Green, solutions for a changing climate.
It is critically important that the markets stay open in this time as opposed to trying to take breaks in the middle. I think that that'll just push off the situation a little bit, but actually could create other pent-up issues if you do close the markets.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacroix here in London. Now let's get back to the latest in Europe and in France. President Emmanuel Macron faces mounting pressure to impose another national lockdown this week. That's as COVID-19 cases threaten to overwhelm the French hospital system. But the finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, told Bloomberg TV that there has been no decision yet on another lockdown. Le Maire said the ministry will continue to support all sectors affected by the virus, adding that he hoped to be able to lift measures in the second half of 2021.
On the lockdown, I just want to insist on the fact that nothing has been decided yet. We will have a very important meeting on Wednesday with President Macron. We will assess the health situation and then take the required decisions. But once again, nothing has been decided yet. Our policy is quite clear. We will support all the economic sectors that are badly hit by the crisis as long as it will be needed. And if we are to take new measures, we will have also to provide new support to the sectors that will be more severely hit by these measures. It must be very clear that we stand beside those sectors. We have decided from the very beginning, from March 2020, to support the employees, to support the companies, to support all the sectors that have been hit by the crisis. And we will continue to do the same as long as the pandemic will continue to strike France and Europe.
How long do you think that support is now going to be required for? Are you starting to change your thinking about the duration of this pandemic? There was an assumption that, for instance, the travel and tourism sector would be back to normal by this summer. That is increasingly being called into question. Are you starting to rethink the duration of this?
I think that back to normal is the kind of wording that I would not use for the time being, because it would be too tricky. Our assumption is that we have to divide the year 2021 in two parts. In the first part of the year 2021, let's say till next summer, I think that we will have to continue supporting some of the economic sectors in France. And once again, we have decided to do so from the very beginning. It would be a political, a social, and an economic mistake to withdraw that kind of measures while the pandemic is still there. But I hope that in the second part of 2021, we will be able to lift the measures for health security. We will be able to alleviate that kind of difficulties. And in that case, if the pandemic is over, I think that we can count on a very strong rebound of the French economy on the second part of 2021. And what makes me really confident about the situation, the economic situation in France, is that when we have decided on the summer 2020 to lift the measures for the health measures, then there has been a very strong rebound in the French economy, which means that we have everything that is required to have a very strong and very quick rebound as soon as the pandemic is over.
Well, that was the French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire in conversation with our very own Guy Johnson. Now let's take a look at the day ahead. We start to get big tech earnings. Microsoft out later after the bell in the US. Here in the UK, of course, HSBC Chief Executive Noel Quinn is set to appear before the UK Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee to answer questions over the lender's move to freeze the accounts of Hong Kong activists. Plus, Bloomberg's Year Ahead event kicks off with interviews from the Norwegian Prime Minister as well as the chief executives of Pfizer, Hilton and Carnival. Now, we'll have plenty more, of course, on that throughout the day. Bloomberg surveillance continues in the next hour. Tom Keene joins me out of New York. We'll talk about the reflation trade. We'll focus quite deeply onto the markets. We'll look at finance. So we have quite a lot of earnings, and we look at the banks as well. Plus, on the politics front, we have a couple of things going on with Italy. Shortly, actually, the Prime Minister should be tending his resignation to the Italian president. We'll see what happens next, whether he can form a new government. You can see the FTSE 100 gaining some 0.6%. This is Bloomberg.
Another day of risk off across the financial markets. We bring you special coverage of all the price action and implications here on Bloomberg Television.
Janet Yellen takes charge at the Treasury, but President Biden's team struggles to win bipartisan support for their $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan. Conte will go, but perhaps not for long. Italy's prime minister will resign today in an effort to form his third government. Plus, UBS announces a share buyback of up to $4.5 billion and a big beat on net income. We hear from our interview with the new chief executive, Ralph Harmers. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua in London, Tom Keene in New York. Tom, we must look at the reflation trade. Overall, we'll spend a bit more time looking at the markets, given the setback, certainly that markets felt after we heard from the Republican Party saying that actually they won't vote, or actually they won't maybe go through with the relief bill until March. And then we look at a couple of politics here in the UK, the Prime Minister sure deciding whether he wants to put everyone in quarantine in a hotel before they arrive here in the UK, and then Italian politics, never dull.
I don't get the hotel thing. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to go down to the bar with everybody else and get the plague. I mean, I don't get it.
I don't think that's allowed, Tom.
It's a veritable,
in your room, that's
really,
the
it's a
point.
veritable stew of news today. Please stay with us because the data is really interesting. And Francine, we've got to look at UBS. I mean, it's the start of earnings season, and this week in the United States. And I'm sorry, the earnings are going to be great. I believe we have GE and 3M today.
Yeah, and then we have all the tech news starting a little bit later on. I love that Tom thinks of hotel and thinks directly of the hotel bar. We'll have more on that.
Why stay there?
Right.
There's no table at the Ned that Pharaoh and I haven't sat at. That's the way I'd put it.
There you go. Let's get straight now to the Bloomberg First Word News. Here's Ritika Gupta. Hi, Ritika.
Morning, Francine, Tom. A delegation of House members took the next step in the impeachment process. The lawmakers delivered the single article of impeachment against Donald Trump to the Senate. That triggered the start of an unprecedented trial of the former president. He's accused of incitement to insurrection. Janet Yellen's first tasks as Treasury Secretary include selling President Biden's new stimulus package and hiring a staff. The Senate confirmed Yellen's nomination by a vote of 84 to 15. She'll be the first woman to hold the job. During her confirmation hearings, Yellen argued that it's time to act big with deficit spending to avoid long-term problems. That argument was rejected by Republicans concerned about rising debt. And Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell is ready to move towards a power-sharing agreement with the Democrats. McConnell had refused to agree to any deal to share power in the 50-50 Senate because Democrats wouldn't promise not to scrap the filibuster. That allows the minority to block legislation by requiring 60 votes to advance most bills. But two Democrats say they support the filibuster, and McConnell said that's good enough. The British government is considering whether to use hotels to quarantine travellers arriving in the UK. The goal is to stop the spread of new coronavirus variants from overseas. Prime Minister Boris Johnson meets with senior officials today. Global News 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg, Tom.
Ritika, thanks so much. Francine and I dedicate this data check to the many people at Davos we're missing. How about Barry, the piano player at the acclaimed Cloudflare, a piano bar? Barry, written up by Eric Silvers yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, up in Nova Scotia, ensconced. Futures mix, red and green on the screen, sort of. There's a little bit of a negative tinge, but a better tape in the last hour. The VIX 23.68. Yields come in. As Francine was mentioned, which way reflation, yield to a 103, 104 right now in the 10-year yield. Oil 56.07. Other than that, it's sort of a churn out there as well. FX giving me no information. Kit Jukes will help with that in a moment. Francine?
Tom, it's not even 5:05. I think we've talked so much about bars, I'm putting you on a health drive. It's celery juice for Tom Keene from now on. Global stocks mixed. M&A deals are giving a bit of a boost to Europe. Of course, it's worries about the new virus variants. It's worries about hurdles to the stimulus proposal in the U.S. that started this risk-off mood in the U.S. And Asia, I did want to show some of the technology stocks in Europe holding, I wouldn't say strong, but they're holding. Euro dollar 121.27. And then on the talk about this quarantine, this pretty stringent quarantine possibility when you come into the UK, you can see sterling 136.53. Now, let's get straight to Kit Jukes, Societe Generale Chief FX Strategist, to talk about this rotation, talk about reflation, the trade that's definitely pausing for now, and some of the risk out there as well. Kit Jukes of Societe Generale joins us. Kit, as always, thank you so much. I immensely enjoy reading your morning notes, first of all, because they're always to the point and always funny. Kit, when you look at some of the reflation trade, is this it? Because we start realizing about, I guess the difficulty that we're going to have in dealing with the pandemic only through vaccines.
I don't think this is it, but it may be an indication that this year is going to be quite messy. I mean, my first thought this morning was, look, we've done 20% in the S&P, pretty much. since the end of October. So in 3 months, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot by any stretch. And so the yield curve steepening in the US has followed from that. The euro-dollar rally, the dollar weakness generally followed from that. And as a bare minimum, it has to slow down. I think it is fair to think it's going to be messy. We can't just be one trade. Rates are super low. We've got a vaccine. Equity prices are going to treble and everything else is going to be fine. This year is going to be an awful lot messier and more difficult than that, for sure. But I don't think it means the reflation trade's over, partly because there isn't anything other than vaccines and easy monetary policy and continued fiscal accommodation to look forward to.
Kit, you basically, start off your morning saying unhealthy levels of cross-asset correlation are back. Until when are they back?
Until we get a new theme. I think that's the bit that really worries me, is that in this kind of, the solution to everything is the Fed has rates super low for super long. And, that has driven everything else. The difficulty with that is, if we were to get inflation in any kind of meaningful fashion, what you do, we'll get more policy dilemmas. What happens if, rather than just people putting curve steepeners on as a reflation trade, we start getting worried about the weight of supply in some bond markets, or we get worried about corporate bond defaults? The world can get much more complicated, and then these correlations will have to break apart. But the biggest danger of all is, that the answer has been repeatedly, let's cut rates further, and that'll help get equity markets up. And as long as equity prices are high enough, everybody's happy. We can't do this forever. We are badly addicted to this particular drug now.
Kit, well said, and I really voice Francine's enthusiasm for Mr. Juke's 4 or 5 paragraph morning note, which is a font of wisdom. Kit, I think we all intuitively understand the correlation between bonds and equities given Fed action. How does Chairman Powell's action, and frankly other central banks and their ultra accommodation, how does it affect foreign exchange flows and interest rate dynamics?
Well, I think in the simplest sense, that what Chairman Powell has done in this cycle is told investors everywhere, you're not going to get much keeping your money in treasuries. Go out and look for something better to do with your money. Get yourself optimistic about economic recovery elsewhere. So the good side of that is it gets money to countries that need investment to get them going. And if we can get them vaccines, they'll get stronger currencies. And that's great. On a negative side, in a sense, what he's doing is playing beggar my neighbor backwards to what the Europeans have done. They cut rates to negative in 2015 to get the euro down by crowding investors out of German bonds. And what Chairman Powell's saying is, you can have that tennis ball back on your side of the court, and you can have a strong euro back.
I look at the strong euro dynamics, and we wait and wait. Is the euro broken now? I mean, with all that's going on just in the last 2 weeks as we stagger into 2021, is that it for a 123-ish euro, and the closest path is a way back down, weaker?
I don't think so. I think we mess around between 120, 123 for, ideally for a fair amount of time. I think we'll see 130 roughly as a high, but not for months and months. It went up too fast. There's too much disinflation for the Europeans to want it, and there's not enough good news on the European side. Now, maybe if they can reignite fiscal accommodation talks across Europe, maybe if they get their act together on vaccinations, then we can accelerate it. But I think for now, I in many ways hope I'm wrong because it's not exciting. For now, what I think is we may find we're just in a period of consolidation around these levels while we kind of let the world catch up with how markets have moved.
Kit, are we going to get something substantive in terms of that COVID relief package in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think we will. I mean, obviously, the markets are a little bit nervous about the idea that it takes 4 to 7 more weeks. But I think that, I don't think we should just give up on the idea that now that the Democrats have control of the political process, they're going to be able to push through fiscal accommodation. I think that's still true. It's just the idea that you get a massive package, with money being handed out by this time next week. We've probably, certainly the bond guys who got the curve so steep and got yields up so fast, they got in a little bit over their skis coming down those slopes in Davos. And they're just going to have to pick themselves up, and it'll just take longer.
All right, falling skis. Kate, thank you so much. We'll get back to Kate Juxer, Société Générale, who stays with us. Now, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is also addressing the Davos Virtual Forum. You can follow her remarks on Bloomberg, of course, at LiveGo. We'll have a number of world leaders speaking. I think there's Emmanuel Macron. There's a number of other prime ministers also of Europe. They'll talk vaccines, a bit of a controversy also regarding the AstraZeneca vaccination. We'll have plenty more on that. Also coming up on the IMF World Economic Outlook Report, Gita Gopinath, IMF chief economist. She'll be in conversation with our very own Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrow. That's at 9:30 a.m. in New York, 2:30 p.m. in London, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge...
All of you who want to buy euro, it's time to place an order to buy at 121.263. Okay, order placed to buy euro at 121.263. And I probably will not be able to place the order because it moved quite substantially higher. Let's see. If it will reach 131, I will have to probably cancel the order. In the meantime, we still hold order to buy well, I need to cancel this order. I'll wait for another time. As you can see, it moved up. Order, cancel.
Sell on Bitcoin, but I want to talk about how we're beginning to see institutional rationalization to move from effective bank transactions over to outright purchase of the crypto story. You know, and it's all part of the, well, it's part of a carefully balanced portfolio. I get that. Is it?
Look, I think the world is going to move towards digital money. The central banks are going to work it out. They're doing an enormous amount of work on it under the guidance of the BIS. So I think in that extent, yeah, we're going to get digital money. Now, that's a whole different question from whether cryptocurrencies, which are intended to avoid the official financial system, will develop a serious value as a store of wealth. What is clear is that they can't all, so there'll be more losers than winners out of that crowd of cryptocurrencies. But it is a rebellion against the the world we're in of zero negative rates and of kind of the kind of monetary policy we've had for the last decade, and that's real. And at the same time, it's a realization that we're using less and less cash, and that digital money and digital central bank money is going to be a thing in our lifetime. But we're still in the foothills of this story and how it plays out, and trying to guess what wins in it is really hard.
On the Bloomberg, folks, you can't see that, I guess. I was going to put up the Bloomberg keyboard, but it's tethered in here because of my big fat fingers. And it's got yellow keys, and one says equities, one says bond, one says currency. Kit Jukes, Bitcoin is slotted on the Bloomberg terminal under currency. Does it have any currency attributes?
It has about as many as gold does conceptually, minus the jewelry aspect. So if you really looked at Bitcoin, you'd say that if you're a gold bug fanatic of the value of gold, your advantage is that there's a supply and demand of gold that comes from its use as a store of wealth and from its use in some industry, but a lot also in jewelry. Bitcoin is aspiring to be one part of that bit. So we debate gold as a currency or a commodity. We could debate Bitcoin as, does it have the currency aspect of gold because it doesn't have the commodity aspect? And I think that would see, both one of its weaknesses, but what it aims to be in the future. And then then we'd get back into the questions about, what do we do with the fact that it's so volatile, and that the buyers of it at the moment are, to a great degree, buying it because they think it's going to go up in price rather than because they need it for something.
Right. I was gonna ask you actually, Kate, what does, if anything, Bitcoin track? Like, what does it move on the back of?
Well, it moves on the same things as gold, as the value of the idea of a store of value where negative real interest rates will support it, where it's going to be perceived as an inflation hedge over the long term, as a place where you can store value outside the regular financial system. So competing for Swiss private banks' attention with other assets of that kind. That, I think, is where it has to be, and certainly until it can get to the point where it can be used for transactions in a big way. But you could imagine a world where people who are much wealthier than any of the three of us might use cryptocurrency for big transactions as being a convenient way of doing things. But they have to evolve into that role, and they have to cope with the desire of some regulators not to lose control of money.
Yeah, we have tuition fees, Kit. Tom also has veterinary bills, so it's not hard being richer than us. When you look at Swiss franc, Kit, is this one of the things that you're watching for the next 6 to 7 months? They have negative rates. It's unclear exactly what the path forward for this currency is. Look, I know we're stuck with negative rates in all sorts of places. I think, to me, we discussed a little bit earlier, to me, the big current account surplus economies all got really strong currencies last year when everybody's rates went to zero. And this year we're kind of taking a pause for breath, saying, well, what now? Where do they go now that we've kind of repriced from that? And the Swiss francs become probably what the Swiss authorities would like it to be, which is an extremely dull currency. But at the same time, they still have this big current account surplus. They still have all the snow, and they still have foreign exchange reserves that are growing at a huge rate because they can't find anywhere to recycle that surplus in investments around the world. So it's doomed to go on being strong. I still can't afford Switzerland either. One final question, Kit Jukes. Your call on sterling, please, on pound sterling. Pound sterling, I think, is going to trade around here against the euro, but can only get stronger. Sterling is still, ever since the referendum, it's traded right down near its historical lows in trade-weighted terms. Yeah. It can't get lower than that. It can only go up. All it needs is some good news, and I'd love some good news, but at the moment, I can't find any, so it's quite quiet. Cable through 140? Yeah, I'm sure that cable, if Eurodollar gets above 125, cable will be well above 140 when that happens. Interesting. Kit Jukes, thank you. Always valuable, particularly those comments on Bitcoin. Mr. Jukes is with Societe Generale. Futures are a little bit of red on the screen, -6. Dow futures at -14. The VIX fractional 23.45. Coming up, the Year Ahead Forum of Bloomberg. The Prime Minister, Erna Solberg of Norway,
along with the CEO of DBS, Bridgewater's CEO as well. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Ritika Gupta with your Bloomberg Business Flash. Leon Black is retiring as CEO of Apollo Global Management because of a scandal involving sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, an outside law firm that found that Black's paid Epstein $158 million, even though the firm never retained him for any services. Black will stay on as Apollo's chairman. UBS plans to buy back $4.5 billion of shares over the next 3 years. The Swiss bank is doubling the size of a previous repurchase program after finishing strongly in 2020. Fourth quarter net income beat estimates thanks to the performance of the investment bank and the wealth management unit. And GameStop is at it again. Shares rose roughly 30% in pre-market trading since the first of the year. The video game retailer has soared 308% yesterday. The stock raised an intraday surge of as much as 145% and triggered at least 9 halts for volatility. GameStop has been a battleground for short sellers and retail traders. And that is the Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom.
Ritika, thanks so much. Francine and I should be in Davos along with all of Bloomberg. We are not, as well as not is Barry, the piano player, the piano bar, and Cloudflare as well. Barry, written up in the Journal yesterday. We do this data check for Barry. Futures at -6, Dow futures -17, the VIX 23.47. Yields come in. Francine highlighted that in her opening, and that's a big deal. A 1.04, even 103. Lower yields there as we talk to Barry in Nova Scotia. Francine?
I was going to say, Barry really, really wants to come on Bloomberg Surveillance. Now, vaccine coverage won't reach a point that would stop transmission of the virus in the foreseeable future. Tom, that's according to the World Health Organization, which is why we're seeing market worry with more negative news about the pandemic. Not only that, but of course, the hurdles to the Biden administration stimulus proposal, fanning the risk-off mood in the U.S. yesterday, and that's filtering through in certain parts of the market. European stocks, though, gaining from a bit of technology uplift. That's because we're expecting quite a lot of earnings later. And then I'm also looking at pound 136.60. Now, later today, we'll be hosting a World Economic Forum panel with Barclays Chief Executive Just Staley, the Banque de France Governor, Villeroy de Gallo, and we also speak to JP Morgan Asset Management Chief Executive Mary Erdoes, Carlyle Chief Executive Kyu Song Lee. We talk about finance. We talk about the stability of the financial and monetary system. You can watch that, parts of it on Bloomberg TV, but also on Live Go on the terminal. It starts at 3 p.m. in London, 10 a.m. in New York. This is Bloomberg.
我开始做直播是在今年年初的时候，那主要是去年的话，我们参加更多的是线下的活动。今年大家都知道，由于中国的这个疫情，导致这些线下活动不能办了，所以更多的交流方式在线上。就今年春节之后，主要是开始在线上通过直播的方式跟粉丝进行交流。直播可能对于投资者来说是陪伴投资者，大家讲讲市场啊，讲讲投资的心理啊，这样的话就可以让大家在投资的时候，心情更平缓。那平缓的话，才能做到长期持有。长期持有的话，才可能赚钱。相对而言，线上可能覆盖的人群更多，因为可能疫情，很多人在家里看直播的人更多。工作吧。
明天希望高开赚钱，
祝大家赚大钱。
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Tom and Francine from London and New York. Now, Tom, always a good time to talk about Italian politics. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte will resign this morning to avoid a damaging defeat in the Senate. According to unnamed officials, he will get a mandate to build a new government. Tom, it's never dull, I have to say, much like U.S. politics in the last 3 to 4 years. You can see live pictures of Palazzo Chigi, which is a former noble residence in Rome, the seat of the Council of Ministers, of course, the official residence of the Prime Minister. We did see Mr. Conte leave Palazzo Chigi a short while ago, going to the Quirinale to hand his resignation. And to talk about what comes next, because frankly, even as an Italian, it's difficult to keep up, let's go straight to Rome and our Ferdinando Giuliano, who's our Bloomberg opinion columnist. Ferdinando, if you're not Italian, the fact that you resign, but then you still have a chance of forming a government is confusing. What are the chances that Giuseppe Conte, after his resignation, stays as Prime Minister, but with a new coalition?
Well, he certainly hopes he will be able to stay. We're talking about a man, after all, who has had no difficulties in switching from a coalition of the populist five-star movement and the hard right league to one of the five-star movement and the left-wing Democratic Party. So, you know, a third government with Giuseppe Conte for him would be absolutely no problem. The issue is what Matteo Renzi, the head of the centrist Italy Alive party and the troublemaker in this crisis, wants. There are 4 options I see. One is we keep the same governing coalition with a different prime minister. Second one is perhaps we have a bigger coalition and maybe Conte has a chance to remain as prime minister. Then there is always the ever-present opportunity in Italian politics, a technocratic government. And then a fourth option, which the opposition is demanding, new elections, but they seem unlikely because lots of MPs really don't want to lose their seats right now. And, of course, there is a pandemic going on after all.
But, Ferdinando, what's the most important thing right now? Is it reform to make sure that the recovery fund money is not squandered? Or is it just stability, given that you have to vaccinate a large percentage of the population fairly quickly?
Well, it's both, really. I mean, I think there are two incredibly important priorities. I mean, Italy's been very hard hit by the pandemic. We're counting more than 80,000 official deaths. That's a lot. And the vaccine rollout has started pretty well, but now there seem to be delays. Some of them, of course, linked to the problems with supply from the manufacturers. But at the same time, you rightly mentioned the recovery fund. This is a lot of money. Italy is the biggest gross beneficiary from the EU. But my point is you need an effective government. You don't just need a government to deal with these two things effectively.
Okay, guys. New order placed to buy euro at 121.27. I'm placing new order to buy at 121.27. It's I'm talking about euro. Probably you will see right here on the top of the screen. This is chart of euro against United States dollar. Yeah. Okay.
An election, and this party could reach maybe 8-10%. So, you know, all in all, people have been a bit dismayed by a government crisis at the moment. The truth is, the Italian population is very divided. Remember, these strange coalition reshuffles happened because the last election, there were really 3 blocks: center-right, center-left, and five-star movement, and none of them really reached enough seats to form a government. So we have a very divided polity at the moment. Of course, incredibly difficult challenges from the economic crisis to the health crisis, and unfortunately, no real side of a strong government ahead.
Well, you know, Ferdinando, very importantly here, you say that this leader is popular. If he's popular, why is he doing this?
Well, he's doing this because Italy is a parliamentary democracy, and what matters is whether you've got enough support in parliament. And at the moment, Giuseppe Conte just doesn't have that. He managed to get a vote of confidence in the Senate by a very tiny majority, and the result was that at the first critical issue, a vote on a reform of justice, the government simply didn't have the votes. Conte benefited from the fact that Italy is a parliamentary democracy because he's been able to kind of rearrange coalitions and stay as prime minister. But now he's suffering. He's paying a price for that. He may be popular among the people, but he just doesn't have the votes in parliament.
Ferdinando, first of all, Tom, you're Italian. It's okay. Could do much, much, much better. Please
really,
get back to work with the Rosetta Stone.
I'm working on it every day.
I'm being so polite.
Thank you, Fran. I am the ugly American. Terribile.
Okay, position opened at 121.27. So if you're looking to trade euro, it's time to buy. So you had to place an order to buy euro. Anybody who wants to find out why we place this order right here at this price, well, you need to get a strategy, right? So, and you will understand why we did it. Okay, speak to you later, guys.
That vaccine hasn't even got close to get an approval in the US, so that suggests a little bit of caution. But generally, there are problems with rollout. There are countries like the Netherlands, France, Belgium, which have really been very slow. I mean, if we look at the number, the EU is around 2 doses per 100 inhabitants. The UK is more than 10. Israel, of course, is about 40. So there needs to be urgency, and politicians, I think, should of course enforce their contracts, but stop just seeking scapegoats. I feel, some of these stuff against pharmaceutical companies is part of this blame-shifting game.
Ferdinando, I was on the Upper West Side of Manhattan yesterday and observed the complete collapse of small business in America. I was thunderstruck, folks, how bad it was. Italy is the land of small business. I mean, everybody knows that. It's been the industry for centuries. How is small business in Italy coping right now, in Venice, in Genoa, and down south?
Well, look, I mean, if you're thinking, for example, of tourist places, I mean, think about just the Dolomites and the places, the wonderful mountain ski resorts, which at the moment are closed. Many of these restaurants and bars will probably never open again. Some businesses are displaying a lot of ingenuity, moving into online, sales, doing wonders with providers such as Amazon, and that's great. But I think when we'll get to the end of this pandemic, hopefully soon, I suspect we'll see tens, if not hundreds of thousands of businesses which will no longer be there. Our favorite bar where to have espresso in a corner of Rome may be unfortunately shut down after all.
Okay, Ferdinando, more takeaway espressos, please, to keep those people in jobs. Ferdinando Giuliano, there, Bloomberg Opinion columnist. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News. Here's Ritika Gupta. Hi, Ritika.
Thanks, Francine. Now it's up to the Senate. A House delegation went to the Senate to formally present the lawmakers with the single impeachment charge against Donald Trump. He's accused of incitement to insurrection. Arguments are set to begin February 8th. Getting a conviction may be difficult. There would have to be at least 17 Republican senators who vote to convict. And former President Trump has opened an office in Florida to, quote, advance the interests of the United States and to carry on the agenda. A statement was released just before the House delivered the article of impeachment to the Senate. The statement's letterhead indicates the office will operate out of Palm Beach. The former president moved to his resort there last week. And Janet Yellen's first tasks as Treasury Secretary include selling President Biden's new stimulus package and hiring a staff. The Senate confirmed Yellen's nomination by a vote of 84 to 15. She'll be the first woman to hold the job. During her confirmation hearings, Yellen argued that it's time to act big with deficit spending to avoid long-term problems. That argument was rejected by Republicans concerned about rising debt. Meanwhile, President Biden says he is open to negotiating that proposed $1.9 trillion stimulus. But he's not ruling out going after a Democrat-only route for passage. Republicans have rejected the price tag as too high. Even some Democrats have questions about the size of the package. Global News 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg. Tom?
Ritika, thanks so much. An important swearing in. The Vice President of the United States will swear in Janet Yellen at 12 noon. That is scheduled today as Secretary of Treasury, and also the Vice President and the second gentleman with a second dose of their vaccine later this afternoon. Some of the tidbits we're seeing out of the White House, the new White House this morning. Ronit Ghosh, Citigroup, head of banker research on the state of banking. Last time we talked to him, it was very valuable. Stay with us. Futures at -8. Francine Lacroix with a great panel today in London. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
I'm David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Their CPG history, their experience, and really how we might be able to combine together to really create this fantastic public company. And so we kind of got into the SPAC thing a little bit before it became such a hot method of going public.
The capital reserve that we already had and the capital generation of our business model gives us the confidence that we can announce this 4 billion Swiss franc share buyback program for the next 3 years. The biggest risk is really, where is this pandemic truly going? On one side, we see the light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine programs really taking off, and therefore we're increasingly confident that that this pandemic will come to an end. On the other side, specifically here in Europe, the lockdowns are more strict than ever, which will have a further deteriorating effect on the economy, on the real economy, and it's really that unpredictability as to how long the pandemic will really take, when the economy can really start off again, and what is then the shape of that economy. I think that's the true risk that we need to see and that we need to manage this year.
Well, that was the newly minted UBS Chief Executive, Ralph Harmers, now joining us to talk about banks, European banks, possible cross-border consolidation, even Wall Street banks, as Ronit Ghosh. He is Citi Global Head of Bank Research. Ronit, great to speak to you today after the earnings of UBS. There are a number of questions about cross-border consolidation, what exactly these banks will become. But before we get to that, what is your immediate thought on UBS? We don't know how the capital markets will do, and we don't know what the future of its investment bank really is.
Sure. So we have a constructive view on the European bank sector, and we're particularly within that positive on the Swiss banks, on both the big Swiss banks. The results that we've seen coming through already, both from the Americans and now from the Europeans, shows that fourth quarter was good. What investors are now asking questions about, though, is the outlook. What is 21 going to be like? When are we going to get strategy updates? Can this amazing 2020 trading performance be sustained? So lots of questions, but the outlook looks better, a lot better than any time in the last 6 to 9 months.
Will we see cross-border consolidation in 2021?
We're definitely seeing M&A come back on the map in both the US and Europe. Cross-border is harder. The ECB are trying to encourage it. The regulators and the policymakers want to create bigger European banks. But initially, we think it'll be domestic in-market consolidation, like we've seen in Spain, in Italy, in the US, and also kind of bank to non-bank. So banks buying asset managers, banks buying brokers. So pan-financial consolidation is also back on the agenda.
Ronan, Tom Keene in America, good morning. I just really want to congratulate you on your 61-page stack. It's really, really, really quite smart. Folks, we protect the copyright of all our guests. You can get that through Citigroup. Ronan, I'm going to cut to the chase. What permeates your 61-page deck is the lack of profitability. How do they fix that?
So there is a structural profitability point and a problem, particularly in Europe. Less so for the Swiss banks and the American banks, but in the Eurozone, interest rates are low and growth is low and costs are high. So there's hopes of rates rising in the long end of the yield curve, particularly in the US. There's a bit of growth coming back. Asset quality will be better. That'll help results. But there's a structural underlying problem, which is, I guess, relates to your earlier question on M&A. There needs to be fewer banks and costs need to be lower. So efficiencies need to improve. The only part of Europe where banks make good money consistently is in Scandinavia. And they have very low cost-income ratios, and that allows them to make money. So it's a structural problem.
Well, it's a structural problem, I understand, but they've got to fix it. Now, you've also mentioned the European banks, such as Mr. Staley, who Francine's going to talk to later today, doing business in America. What is, I don't want to get you in trouble with Ms. Fraser, but what is holding back the mating of profit-desiring U.S. banks and profit-desiring EU banks? Culture?
Consolidation is much easier inside markets. If you're a big American bank, your interest in Europe has historically been in capital markets and investment banking. And most big US banks already have established, in many cases very successful, corporate banks and capital market operations. Buying a big European bank comes with very large balance sheets and other issues that doesn't tend to be high up the agenda for an American bank right now. So I would expect the consolidations to be more inside single countries in Europe, then cross-border within Europe, and then bank to asset manager or bank to wealth manager. I'm not expecting, whether it's Asia to the US, US to Europe, intercontinental cross-border M&A.
Ronan, do you have a favorite European bank at the moment, either because it's unfairly valued or it could be unlocking some potential? And where's the most lucrative part of a European bank right now? Is it still German Mittelstand when things get better?
Sure. So as I said before, we're positive and constructive on the European banks. Regions we like, areas we like the Swiss because of their business mix, more fee income. We actually like the UK domestic banks as well, because we think there'll be better profitability this year. Vaccines are making good progress. So those are among the big banks, two areas we're quite fond of, the Swiss and the domestic UK. And as I said, structurally, long-term, the way you make money in the sector is own high ROE banks that compound book value. Those tend to be in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, and the Benelux. So that's where I'd be looking for long-term investors.
Ronan, what's the difference between a UBS and a Credit Suisse right now?
Good question.
That's a very long question. I mean, our published view is we're positive on both. We've had Credit Suisse in our top picks list for a while. So there's a valuation difference.
Well, there's a valuation difference. Come on. Ronan, we love having you on. Does Switzerland now, in the new technology, do they have room for two major banks, or is it inevitable that they consolidate?
Well, the banks, the two big Swiss banks are obviously beyond just the local market, right?
Sure.
So, those are two of the biggest global wealth managers out there, biggest private banks in the world. There's no reason why there can't be two Swiss banks at the top of the list of the world's biggest wealth managers. If all they did was retail banking and domestic SME banking, that'd be a different question. But their market is the whole world. So the fact that there's two of them, I don't think it matters much.
What is the distinctive threat of the American banks who want to take marginal business in Europe? What is the distinction of how they do business, including your Citigroup?
So the main difference is the American banks in Europe tend to be focused on quite targeted clients and business lines. Most of the American banks in Europe are not universal banks. They're not trying to be everything for everyone. And that's a problem for many of the local European banks. So there are certain clients, be it high net worth individuals, large companies, certain products, certain services, IPOs. So it's a very targeted approach, and that's the difference. There was a time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when American banks had mass market, consumer operations, credit card businesses, and so on in Europe. That time is gone.
Ronit, thank you so much for joining us. Ronit Goose there, Citi Global Head of Bank Research. Now, coming up on the United Nations Climate Change Conference, Bloomberg will be speaking to Alok Sharma, COP26 president. He'll be joining Bloomberg exclusively for a conversation on the UK efforts. Of course, Glasgow is the host city of COP26 later in the year. That interview, 11:30 a.m. in New York, that's 4:30 p.m. in London, and this is Bloomberg.
Are you ready to announce today that you're running for president in 2024?
Well, that would really break some news. Your show would get more, a lot of eyeballs if we said something like that, David.
Give you a sense of the real-time action. The 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Rishka Gupta with your Bloomberg Business Flash. Shares of China's internet behemoth Tencent Holdings slumped in Hong Kong. A world-beating surge in the stock had pushed its market value close to $1 trillion for the first time. But an advisor to China's central bank made comments to local media indicating that excessive liquidity and cheap borrowing costs were creating bubbles. Twitter has banned the CEO of MyPillow, Mike Lindell, who insisted that Donald Trump was the real winner of the presidential election. Lindell was banished for violating Twitter's civic integrity policy. He continued to insist the election was rigged, even after the Capitol riots that left several people dead. And Harvard and Yale are amongst the universities whose multi-billion-dollar endowments have been buying cryptocurrency. According to a report in CoinDesk, most have been buying digital currency for at least a year. The biggest of those currencies, Bitcoin, rose fourfold in 2020 and gained even more to start this year. And that is your latest Bloomberg Business Flash. Francine.
Rudiger, thanks so much. Now, this is what the markets are looking at. We did have a bit of a correction yesterday in U.S. equities because of a pushback, certainly a possible delay in the recovery fund, or at least what we heard, the stimulus in Congress. Now, global stocks pretty much mixed. We do have a bit of M&A news here in Europe. It's giving the markets a bit of a boost. Worries about new virus variants, but also hurdles to the stimulus proposal in the U.S. They'll continue with the risk-off mood. Tom, I'm not seeing a lot of news for the moment on the market impact of volatile politics in Italy. I guess it's something that we're more or less accustomed to, especially when you have the ECB staying firm with PEP.
Yeah, the politics side is there, but also earnings coming in. Joe Feldman at Telsey Advisory Group out on Amazon moments ago with a price move up to $4,000. A nice lift for Joe Feldman. His enthusiasm on Amazon. Bitcoin not with much enthusiasm today, down a little bit. It's within range, I'm going to call it as well. And of course, the VIX 23.85 as we struggle with the data check. We need clarity on the American economy. It will be delivered by Andrew Hollenhorst of Citigroup. We do that next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong. But it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
this morning, suddenly yields, well, they reversed. Perhaps, well, Schumer says a lack of stimulus till March. Maybe as well, a wait for big tech earnings. Equity futures, they slipped this morning. The minority leader, well, he relents as the majority say the Senate will not be like the rabble in the House. The filibuster, it will endure. Pro tip, Senator Portman of the minority, Senator Portman of Ohio, done with gridlock. And no doubt, Secretary Yellen will listen to Chairman Powell's press conference tomorrow. Good morning, everyone. Bloomberg Surveillance Worldwide. Francine Lacroix in London. I'm Tom Keene in New York. Francine, any number of news flow, but we are waiting for news, as we saw in the Netherlands a few days ago from Italy. Is it right to say a collapse of the government?
Well, it's, of course, something that's calculated, Tom, so it's not really a collapse. We were talking about a collapse when Matteo Renzi just 10 days ago withdrew his support from the government. This is a calculated move by the current prime minister in saying he can resign and then forming a new government that's a bit more solid for him. Of course, a number of questions out there on who does he ally himself with. So we could see a whole new government, but it's unlikely at this point, from what I'm hearing, that we'll have fresh elections in Italy.
Well, we will see. One of the stores are falling, and then, of course, the vaccine as well. Francine, the basic tone I got, including Ferdinando Giuliano's wonderful essay on the failure of Europe, is just that. Francine, from where you sit in London, is it a failure of vaccine programs in Europe?
So, Tom, I'm quite careful because, of course, what we're doing, the premise for our analysis is the last 2 to 3 weeks. You could see a sudden turn with a significant ramp up of vaccination, but certainly when you look at the UK, that I think have vaccinated more people in the last 3 days than a country like France since the beginning of the year, you wonder why France and Italy are so far behind the UK that really have it sorted. Again, Tom, it's not only about doses, it's actually where you can get the vaccination. Doctor sign off. Here you can actually get them at the pharmacy. So the whole distribution is different from country to country.
Well, interesting. In America, the vice president and the second gentleman will be getting their second dose of the vaccine today. With our first word news in New York, here's Ritika Gupta.
Thanks, Tom. A delegation of House members took the next steps in the impeachment process. The lawmakers delivered the single article of impeachment against Donald Trump to the Senate. That triggered the start of an unprecedented trial of the former president. He's accused of incitement to insurrection. Janet Yellen's first tasks as Treasury Secretary include selling President Biden's new stimulus package and hiring a staff. The Senate confirmed Yellen's nomination by a vote of 84 to 15. She'll be the first woman to hold the job. During her confirmation hearings, Yellen argued that it's time to act big with deficit spending to avoid long-term problems. That argument was rejected by Republicans concerned about rising debt. And Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell is ready to move towards a power-sharing agreement with the Democrats. McConnell had refused to agree to any deal to share power in the 50-50 Senate because Democrats wouldn't promise not to scrap the filibuster. That allows the minority to block legislation by requiring 60 votes to advance most bills. But 2 Democrats say they support the filibuster, and McConnell said that's good enough. The British government is considering whether to use hotels to quarantine travellers arriving to the UK. The goal is to stop the spread of new coronavirus variants from overseas. Prime Minister Boris Johnson meets with senior officials today. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Francine.
Ritika, thanks so much. The data point for today is 2. All is right in America, as there are not 1 but 2 dogs back at the White House. Champ is the older dog at 12 years old. Major is a bit younger. Champ in the foreground there with the First Lady. Rumor has it, Francine, the rug in the green room, the French rug in the green room, has been christened, and they were out on the South Lawn yesterday as well. Futures at -7. Francine?
Yeah, with the dog updates. I think we heard them on, or someone heard them actually on a conference call with the president. I mean, it kind of brings, the normality of living day to day with dogs, even at the White House. Stocks are a little bit mixed today, Tom. Dollar is pretty much flat. Treasury yields are rising. Again, there are worries about the new virus variants, and there are worries about hurdles to the stimulus proposal in the U.S., Tom.
Very good. Right now, we will look at comments made yesterday by a newly minted President Biden.
We can't afford not to invest now. We can't afford to fail to invest now. And I think there's a growing realization of that on the part of all but some very, very hard-edged partisans, maybe on both sides. But I think there is a growing consensus. Whether we get it all done exactly the way I want it remains to be seen. But I'm confident that we can work our way through.
Into the first 100 days with interesting news flow and, of course, the drama of the walk of the impeachment over to the Senate yesterday as well. Emily Wilkins is our Bloomberg congressional reporter and joins us this morning. Emily, what is the significance of Portman of Ohio saying, "I'm done"?
When Rob Portman said that he would retire yesterday, it came as a shock to a lot of people. He was not on the retirement watch list. But in a statement, he does point out that he feels like he's a moderate in the Senate. He's a moderate Republican. He's open to work with Democrats. He has sided with Democrats on some issues. And he said in his statement that he feels like there's not that much of a spot for him anymore, a place in a hyper-partisan Senate that he just doesn't feel like he can be as effective.
What is the significance of this, not only to Republicans from Democrats? You remember the House retirements here 2 years ago, 3 years ago as well. Do you anticipate that there'll be many other Rob Portmans?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we already are seeing some more moderate individuals. Richard Burr, Pat Toomey, perhaps not as moderate as Portman, but they have also announced they've also announced their retirements. They will not be returning. It's interesting, though, because you have this happening in the Senate, but then in the House, you have the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a bipartisan caucus dedicated on getting both sides to work together. And they just expanded their membership by 16 members. So they have grown. So there's definitely an appetite for bipartisanship on the Hill. It's just hard to do because the country is so partisan right now. And with those individuals who are more in the middle, you're also seeing more individuals on either side.
Good morning, Emily. So what's your take on what kind of stimulus proposal would actually get through? Is it size? Is it where the money goes? Or is it just a delay in timing?
I think those are great questions. I mean, Chuck Schumer said yesterday that he was expecting a month to 6 weeks to pass some stimulus funding. There are also debates about passing a slimmer stimulus bill. We heard after this weekend the potential idea of just doing something focused particularly on getting funding toward vaccines and getting vaccines out there. I think this is something that we're going to see negotiated not just in the next 2 weeks before impeachment, but it also sounds like after the impeachment trial, this is still something lawmakers are going to be discussing.
When do we find out, Emily, what kind of, how quickly or how late this will pass?
That's the million-dollar question. I mean, Biden has made this a priority. He is definitely working towards getting this out quickly. You heard in his remarks yesterday sort of saying that speed is of the essence here. But look, this is Congress. This is the Senate. They're not a body known for moving particularly quickly.
Okay, guys, stop on profit for euro at 121.29. Yep. Let's place stop on profit. And as you can see, whatever happened, yep, it's right here. Whatever happened, you're already, guys, in profit. That's it. Position closed at 121.29. Well done, all of you who follow the trade. Whatever spread you got from your broker, £5 or £30 or £20. In our case, we have £100 spread. 2 pips gives you 2 pips of profit. Okay? Well done.
Freshman made a splash yet? I mean, you're wired up to the white marble of the Capitol. Is it too early to know which freshmen are sort of providing leadership?
That depends on the House or in the Senate. In the House, one of the people who I think is particularly interesting is Peter Meyer. He's a Republican. He's of Michigan. He's a freshman, and he was one of the 10 House Republicans to go ahead and vote for impeachment. He's gotten a lot of flack and pushback from it, and he represents, just a very interesting district there.
Emily, what are you watching out for the rest of the week? I know that, Joe Biden has also spoke to a number of world leaders. I think the only one he tweeted about was Angela Merkel.
definitely going to be keeping an eye on Biden, any other executive actions from him. He's obviously signed a ton in the last several days. Also keeping an eye out for how the Senate moves forward now that McConnell and Schumer have come to a power-sharing agreement.
Emily, we're out of time. I got one key question. Do any senators or House people, do they have dogs in their office like Champ and Major at the White House?
Well, I feel the most important thing about Champ and Major is that they are shelter dogs. This is a shelter dog that has made it all the way to the White House, first time ever. Incredibly important for all the shelter dogs out there.
Good, and then pretty soon they'll have a new puppy, which will be good, and there'll be a 3-dog night at the White House. Emily Wilkins, what's sad is Emily Wilkins has no clue who 3-dog night is. Okay, Emily Wilkins, thank you so much, our congressional reporter. Wait, Francine Lacroix has no idea.
We're too young, Tom. Too young.
3-dog.
Different generation.
Night is, yes. Let us celebrate. Okay, coming up on Balance of Power, Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey. That's at 12 noon in New York time as well. On we go to a hard day's night. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan. We did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
Good morning, everyone. We are thrilled. Never do we editorialize. Well, guess what? We are. Janet Yellen to be the 78th Secretary of Treasury of the United States of America. If you're removed from Yellen economics, she owns the word slack. On her tenure with a crashing labor market, she was adamant and heated on slack. And Francine, I will say this, you know when Janet Yellen gets upset, because just like Schumer, she switches into a Brooklyn accent. She goes from a refined, fancy accent. I've busted her chops about this, and she switches into street Brooklyn when she's angry. It's a sight to behold.
Yeah, and it's also an interesting relationship, right, that she'll have with Jay Powell, given their previous roles. So it'll be, I think, an interesting dynamic that we can't really underestimate.
Yeah. I'd like to say I'm not biased, but I am. For all of us at Team Surveillance, we are thrilled to see this new Secretary of Treasury, truly one of our esteemed economists. He studied Janet Yellen. Andrew Hollenhorst joins us right now with Citigroup, their chief U.S. economist. Andrew, let's rip up the script as we can do with you. When you think of Yellen economics and how it moves over to her new political policy, what do you think that Janet Yellen is distinctive for?
So I think you started in exactly the right spot, Tom. I mean, it's really for Yellen been about labor markets, and what a good focus to have right now when the labor market is still really hurting. So in the Fed chair role, it was addressing that through monetary policy. In the Treasury Secretary role, it will be about all the other tools, including fiscal, that governments have at their disposal to try to address that real problem that we still have with unemployment.
Would you assume that a la Greenspan in an era long, long ago, back when Three Dog Night was making hits, do you assume, Andrew Hollenhorst, that the currency discussion will go back to Treasury away from discussion at, say, a Fed chairman's press conference?
So you're just slightly before my time with Three Dog Night, but I think I can still answer the question. In terms of the currency, we heard Yellen say in her confirmation hearings this phrase that exchange rates should be market determined. And of course, in a flexible exchange rate world, they should be. That's a pretty obvious answer from an economist, I think. But it is a change. It is a shift, right? We used to always hear from the Treasury Secretary some kind of verbiage about a strong dollar policy. And I think going forward, yes, Treasury still has formal responsibility for the dollar, but I think more of this emphasis that it's a market-determined element, it's a price like other prices in the market, and it's not something that the Treasury is necessarily looking to control on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis.
Andrew, what will happen to the stimulus? Is there, such a conviction in the markets that actually, because the Democrats are a lot of these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's still a lot of unknowns about exactly the path that we're going to go down in terms of legislative strategy. There's still the potential for a bipartisan deal. That there's always that potential. This is going to take time. I was not surprised by Senator Schumer's comments that this is probably looking more at a March timeframe rather than something that's going to happen in the immediate near term. I have to say, with what we've heard so far, it does look increasingly likely that we'll go to a party line reconciliation package. But, the American people are not interested in budget reconciliation and filibusters. They're interested in having food in the refrigerator, having a good future for their children, right? So these are the issues that I think continue to be a focus for policymakers at a higher level, outside of the kind of minutia of exactly how this is going to happen legislatively.
Right, so outside of the minutia, Andrew, what's more important, that you get something quickly or that you get the right amount longer?
So I think what you'd really like to do, and of course it's politically impossible to do this, what you'd really like to do is kind of triage things. And I think that is some of this movement towards looking at what is the most pressing problem right now. You want to get vaccine out as quickly as possible. You want to have that program well funded, well supported. So there does seem to be some bipartisan agreement around that. If you could split that off and that could go through very quickly, that's probably the thing you would like to do today. And after that, I would start looking, and I would think about our new Treasury Secretary Yellen and the emphasis that she's had on labor markets. Look at who is still really hurting in this economy. Look at unemployed, that last jobs report that we had, where we had the economy as a whole really gaining jobs, but a net loss in jobs driven by the restaurant sector and leisure. Look at those areas that are still hurting because they're still out there. You'd love to just triage through those pain points. I think politically, this probably has to come together as a negotiated package.
But look, this is right where I wanted to go, Andrew. This is so important. I look out in the country, there's no joy to the world. There's no question about that. How do you move policy to segment inequality that's out there, that's tangible, that's real? The fact of the matter is the politicians are using a blunt instrument. That doesn't get it done, does it?
Right. So that is the big issue that we have. And if I bring it back to Treasury Secretary Yellen again, if you're dealing with monetary policy, you essentially only have a blunt instrument you can use. With fiscal policy, you have blunt instruments, and we've seen that with broadly based stimulus checks, very broad programs that are providing aid to the economy as a whole. But you also have the potential to do things that are much more targeted. And I think that the one positive I can say about the extended period of negotiation that we're probably about to go through legislatively is that hopefully that can give policymakers time to focus on some of those more targeted measures that really can address these issues, because we do have inequality that is a real issue in the economy, of course, before the pandemic. And those inequalities have been in some sense enhanced by the pandemic. There are people like me who are very lucky to keep a job, be able to do it remotely. There are other people who have been working in industries like the restaurant industry, where those industries are still really suffering right now.
Andrea, is it possible that we're also misconstruing or misanalyzing the relationship that the U.S. will have with China going forward?
So I think that's something that's really been put on the back burner from now. And if you listen to the rhetoric coming out of the Biden administration, it's kind of a period of reassessing without making a lot of changes. Quite frankly, both the Chinese government policymakers, the U.S. government policymakers are focused on domestic economies, the domestic COVID issues. So there's just been a much greater focus on what's going on internally. So I think those kind of issues, especially as a market driver, are probably off the table for at least the next 6 months.
Anders, thanks for the brief. Greatly appreciate it. Mr. Hollenhorst is the Citigroup, their chief U.S. economist as well. We've got lots going on today, and really the beginning of earnings season, which used to be symbolic of one of America's giant companies. That has changed. General Electric out, really leading it off. 3M, I believe, we'll see today. Unsure where Alcoa is, which has always been a traditional forward announcer as well. In a little light off the estimate, we're going to look at this. I always go to organic revenue growth on GE. I don't see that statistic yet. But anyway, we can always signal that it is a change, GE, given what we've known over the years. We'll have much more on earnings as we begin a busy week. Coming up, the International Monetary Fund and their World Economic Outlook Report. Gita Gopinath, IMF Chief Economist, in the 9 o'clock hour. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
For a typical clothes wash, up to 700,000 fibres can come off our clothes.
Permet de collecter environ 3 à 5 tonnes de déchets de PET chaque mois. Donc, une partie est utilisée pour faire des bateaux, une autre partie pour faire d'autres poubelles, et d'autres parties, bouteilles, sont plutôt stockées que nous fournissons à certains partenaires.
surveillance, General Electric, and not the General Electric of olden times, out with earnings. Their guidance forward is really what I find interesting, and they're looking here at low single-digit range. Of course, organic revenue growth is the tradition at GE within financial engineering and also their industrial business of decades ago. I saw a negative 3% statistic on organic revenue growth. A little bit of confusion out in the headlines by Francine. We'll be careful here. GE with a nice lift.
Yeah, we understand that GE ended 2020 with $37 billion of liquidity. Tom, of course, then we get figures from, 3M, Lockheed, and Raytheon. It'll be interesting to have all of these to maybe paint a clearer picture. Not only one company that could have something very specific to them, but, all four of these companies to really try and understand the breakdown. What's interesting in GE, Tom, is that if you look at the power revenue, it's different from aviation, and it's, very different from renewable energy and healthcare. So if you break it down, and I think most of them actually beat estimates, apart from renewable, which I see a touch below revenue estimates, then it gives us a sense of how these various divisions are doing, Tom.
Yeah, free cash flow with a nice lift, though, as well. All-in free cash flow seems to be moved higher as well. Francine?
Tom, later today, I'll be hosting a World Economic Forum panel on monetary and financial system going forward, the stability and not of them, with the Barclays chief executive, the governor of the Banque de France, JP Morgan Asset Management chief executive, and the Carlyle chief executive as well. That panel starting at 10 a.m. in New York, that's 3 p.m. in London, and this is Bloomberg.
Okay guys, it's time to place stop on profit for Swiss franc. So all of you who placed order and who executed a few hours ago, and sold short Swissy, you need to place a stop on profit at 0.88875. Okay? So we play stop, and as you can see, whatever happened, you already end up in profit. Let's see how far it will go. Maybe we will put profit further. As you can see, we might put profit even higher for us. It means lower in this case because we sell short. And as you can see right now, we can put already stop on profit to 0.88845. Actually, we will put the nice resistance level. We will put a 0.88855 right here. Okay. As you can see, we sold short. What time was it? It was, you can see from here, 9:15. Yep, we sold short. It was nice movement, momentum. It went up, then it went down. So anybody who wanted to sell short had a chance to sell, enter position, and sell short at around this level. Right now, the time to place stop on profit, because according to our strategy, the price might change and will go to different directions. So for me, and it's better to end up with profit, not with stop loss. Makes sense, right? And from now on, we will see how far it will go. Let's see.
Bloomberg opinion on industrial America. Brooke, I want to frame this out right now, which is GE flat for 10 years, 3M coming out right now, up 10% per year, sort of moldy. Okay, I guess that's okay. And Honeywell up 20% per year. You know, Brooke Sutherland, that it's not what you do in industrial, it's what you don't do. What did Honeywell not do that caused so much pain at 3M and particularly at GE?
Well, you know, I mean, I think 3M and GE are both very unique cases, but, you know, there's a lot of things that Honeywell did right. You know, they have been investing in digital technologies, but they haven't gone all out. They haven't been splashing around billions and billions of dollars. It's been a very focused effort in a way that complements the business. They're also diversified. So at a time when aerospace hasn't been doing that well, Honeywell is one of the few diversified conglomerates. And that's really, you know, meant that it has some bright spots, even in this time of unprecedented disruption. I mean, Honeywell sells N95 masks. They also have a business that sells warehouse equipment to e-commerce providers, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, has been a strong demand spot for them. But, you know, the issues at 3M and GE are very unique. And for GE, it was betting on fossil fuel markets at the wrong time and building up leverage that they couldn't support. For 3M, what's really held that stock back is the PFAS liabilities and concerns that they could have a multi-billion-dollar obligation down the road, especially under the Biden administration.
3M with a middle upper single-digit guidance into 2021, up 5 to 8% as well. Brooke Sutherland, what we note, particularly with GE, is there's the industrial operating segments story, and there's also the financial story. Which is dominant right now in your analysis?
Well, they've been unwinding the financial part of GE for several years now. They think they realize that this is not something that investors found attractive, and they've been taking steps to unwind that. Now, that is sort of a key contention between the bulls and the bears in GE right now, is the extent to which GE is still relying on that financial arm to prop up its industrial free cash flow. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's lots of different avenues that you can use once you do have that financial arm, whether that's, you know, factoring receivables or, you know, selling spare jet engines to your jet lessor arm. Now, you know, it's very difficult to say just on the first look at these numbers the extent to which that happened, but that is a key debate for the bulls and the bears in GE right now, is the extent to which the company is still relying on that financial arm.
Brooke, how do they need to adapt and adjust to the post-pandemic world? How much of the, you know, you laid it out beautifully. They're almost, they have a natural hedge because of the various divisions. What happens post-COVID-19?
So that was actually Honeywell that has a natural hedge because of the divisions. And so for GE, I mean, I think that's a real question, you know, pandemic or not, what the long-term future for this company is. I think aviation is the crown jewel, and obviously that will come back eventually. We're all going to want to get on planes as soon as possible once this thing is over. But, you know, a lot of GE's business is in the power segment. That's gas turbines. You know, they said last year that they were no longer going to be participating in the new build of coal power plants. Many people would say that that's been a long time coming. I think the difficulty is, you know, with renewables becoming ever more attractive and ever cheaper, what the trajectory looks like for that gas turbine market. Now, GE does have a renewable business, but they are in wind power. They're not in solar. They're not in storage. There's some argument that those would be the more attractive parts of the renewable market. And renewables right now is not a profitable business for GE, nor is it for, you know, some of the other players in this industry. But that is a difficulty that they're going to have to contend with long term.
Yeah, I guess I was looking at the divisions, you know, power, aviation, renewable energy, and healthcare, thinking that that could also be some kind of hedge or some kind of play. Does the healthcare, you know, what form does the healthcare take in 18 months from now?
Yeah, no, to your point, I mean, it's good to be diversified, but it depends on how you're diversified. And so, yeah, you know, I think healthcare is obviously one of the more attractive businesses at GE right now, partly because it just hasn't had any problems, but it's also not really a fast-growing business. They sold the biopharma part of that to Danaher. That was the fastest-growing, most exciting part of the healthcare business, so that's no longer part of GE. Healthcare is just sort of a steady-as-she-goes business. We're talking about MRI machines, X-rays. I mean, these are not necessarily hot corners of the healthcare market, but they do throw off a decent amount of cash, and so it just sort of is what it is in healthcare, which is certainly a benefit, and I think GE is happy to have had that during this moment of crisis.
Brooke, we're on the same page here with Mr. Culp, 25 years plus at Danaher. Is there a Danaherization of GE going on, or is he quite frankly going the other way?
I think that he's trying to make it as much like Danaher as he can. I think there was a misconception when he came in that he was some kind of a Mr. Fix-It, and that's not really what he did at Danaher. At Danaher, it was about, buying these businesses that were okay and really making them great by applying the Danaher operating system. And so he is, to some extent, doing that at GE. I mean, his MO is all about lean manufacturing and really getting on the ground floor. I mean, he's known for walking the factory floor, talking to the rank and file workers, really making sure they understand how to run this business. In that respect, he's probably more similar to a Jack Welch than a Jeff Immelt. But, I think he's trying to do what he can to make this more of a Danaher, at least as far as the operating culture, but it's certainly a much more Herculean task than he ever faced at Danaher.
Brooke Sutherland, thank you so much. And as we see 3M with that middle, a little bit up guidance on revenue growth, I mean, this is going to be a key to earnings, particularly within the natural disaster of this pandemic. J&J, yes, they're going to have details soon on the vaccine, but J&J with operational sales growth of 8.8%. We're just getting out sparse headlines right now, but you really wonder if we can get high single-digit growth out of J&J into 2021. I'm not saying that's going to occur, but that's a headline to watch for here as their earnings roll out. Francine?
I have to say, Tom, you don't always know what Elon Musk is going to tweet, and he tweeted, "I kind of love Etsy." So we'll have to see exactly what that means for Etsy, but certainly in pre-market, it's getting a little bit of a boost, gaining some 5.2%. I remember when Etsy IPO'd, and you looked at the valuation, you kind of thought exactly, what it means. It's kind of like a marketplace that's difficult to take hold of. And then even Elon Musk saying, I kind of love Etsy. We'll have to say exactly where that brings us or what kind of earnings they come up with, Tom.
I have no clue. We're balanced. You didn't know what Three Dog Night is, and I don't know what Etsy is. I mean, it's great.
Homemade craft, Tom. Pom-poms, homemade pom-poms from Liechtenstein and all sorts of places.
Okay.
It's like an Amazon of crafts.
I'm learning something every day here on surveillance. I always learn with our first word news. Here's Ritika Gupta.
Thanks, Tom. Now it's up to the Senate. A House delegation went to the Senate to formally present the lawmakers with the single impeachment charge against Donald Trump. He's accused of incitement to insurrection. Arguments are set to begin February the 8th. Getting a conviction may be difficult. There would have to be at least 17 Republican senators who vote to convict. And former President Trump has opened an office in Florida to, quote, advance the interests of the United States and to carry on the agenda. A statement was released just before the House delivered the article of impeachment to the Senate. The statement's letterhead indicates the office will operate out of Palm Beach. The former president moved to his resort there last week. And Janet Yellen's first tasks at Treasury Secretary include selling President Biden's new stimulus package and hiring a staff. The Senate's confirmed Yellen's nomination by a vote of 84-15, and she'll be the first woman to hold the job. During her confirmation hearings, Yellen argued that it's time to act big with deficit spending to avoid long-term problems. That argument was rejected by Republicans concerned about rising debt. Meanwhile, President Trump says Biden says he's open to negotiating that proposed $1.9 trillion stimulus, but he's not ruling out going after a Democrat-only route for passage. Republicans have rejected the price tag as too high. Even some Democrats have questions about the size of this package. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg. Francine?
Ritika, thanks so much. Now, coming up next, we continue tracking COVID-19 with Dr. Amish Adalja. He's Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security Senior Scholar. This is Bloomberg.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
We're only safe when everybody's safe, and that's why at AstraZeneca we decided to provide this vaccine to everybody around the world at no profit and as quickly as possible so that we could stop the virus from spreading and potentially mutating and returning to the rich countries.
We have found a vaccine as an industry, particularly Pfizer and Moderna, but as well AstraZeneca and others, in record pace. And we're rolling that out in really, I think, in a remarkable way when I think you take the long arc of history. It feels a little bumpy right now, but I hope that over the course of this year, as the scale up really happens, people will appreciate the magic of modern medicine and the fact that we could tackle a pandemic in this way.
The South Africa strain has a very high level of antibody. It is actually higher than the level of antibody of people that have been naturally infected. So we believe it is protective right now.
The vaccine industry speaks there at the World Economic Forum meeting. Speaking as well is Italy and their fractured government. Francine?
Yeah, so Tom, we know that it was a rocky 10 days for the Prime Minister after Matteo Renzi actually withdrew his support 10 days ago. And we found out yesterday that he was going to resign. He's just done moments ago. This is according to the Italian newspaper Il Corriere. We actually saw him leave Palazzo Chigi, going to the president saying, I resign. But this is a political calculation, Tom. He thinks that he can reform a coalition and go back to govern.
Very good. Well, there it is this morning. We'll have much more on this through the coming days as well. Right now, as we heard from the CEOs managing the message forward on this natural disaster, Amish Adalja is most good at looking at the entire system of this pandemic. He's at the Johns Hopkins Center. We welcome him this morning for an update. Amish, I'm absolutely fascinated about what you've learned about the machinery of getting the vaccine out. Are we getting better at it?
We're definitely getting better at it, but we're not quite fast enough. This really has to be an effort that has no speed limit. And early on in December, it was very slow going with appointments, filling out paperwork, only scheduling a certain amount of people, and that's gotten better. And we are sort of hitting that million dose per day mark that people have been talking about. But we have to go much faster if we're going to stay ahead of these variants, stay ahead of this fast spreading pandemic. And I think it really has to be kind of an all hands on deck approach, using federal government assets like FEMA, the National Guard, to set up mass vaccination clinics. It can't be something that goes kind of at a pace where you have to kind of do this in a very managed manner. It has to be really assembly line. What we're seeing in the UAE, what we're seeing in Israel, that's the pace we need to be aiming for.
What will make the difference, Amish, on how quickly we can get there? I mean, again, we were looking at some of the stats. I mean, world population, 7.8 billion. If you get herd immunity at 70%, that's a hell of a lot of vaccinations very quickly.
I think that the biggest difference is going to be, at least in the United States, is being able to actually find people to vaccinate and to actually give the shot, as well as find mass gathering locations where you can do this. So, for example, a mass vaccination site at a stadium or at a convention center, and having people move through it in an assembly line and not really have all the delays. And a lot of that has to do with the predictability, because many states, many places don't know when they're going to get more vaccines, so they're very hesitant and cautious. They're not kind of going through this as if this is kind of, if they can expect to get more later. They're just kind of doing what they can do, and then they wait and they schedule more appointments. That pace can't happen. So I think we need to see a lot more predictability and visibility into the supply chain and when it's coming. And that, I think, will probably give a lot of states a lot more confidence when they set up these appointments.
Are there definitely enough vaccines to go around in the U.S. right now?
Well, right now, I think we're worried about the supply chain more in the medium to longer term, because we've got companies like Moderna and Pfizer that have contracts with Operation Warp Speed, so they are increasing their production capacity. But what the biggest problem is now is that many states can't even take the vaccines that they have in their freezers and put them into people's arms. So if you look at states, maybe with the exception of West Virginia, North Dakota, you have a lot of states that have the majority of their vaccines still sitting in freezers. And I think that can't be the issue anymore. We can't have vaccines in the freezer, and that may be because they're worried about second doses. They don't have enough people to do this. All of that really needs to evaporate as quickly as possible, and there should be no vaccine left in the freezer. And I think that has to do with logistics, and it has to do with states having support from the federal government for the resources to actually turn these vaccines into vaccinations.
Once that happens, first of all, how quickly do you think that happens with a new government in charge, with a new administration in charge? And even if you get through that, what's the percentage of the population in the U.S. being vaccinated?
So I do think this is picking up, and it was picking up at the end of the Trump administration, and it continues to pick up under the Biden administration, and they've made it a major priority to fix this problem. I do think it's going to be sometime before we hit the herd immunity threshold, probably in summer. But remember, we will get benefits from the vaccine before that, because the vaccine priority groups and the rollout has been designed not necessarily to stop spread, but to stop death and to stop hospitalizations. That's why nursing home residents, community dwelling elderly individuals, those with high-risk conditions, those are the people that are first, and they make up the bulk, if not including the majority of people who are getting hospitalized and die. So I think once you get that group vaccinated, and we're already starting to see benefits like that in places like Israel, you will start to see hospital levels go down. You'll start to see deaths go down. Cases are still going to spread. This isn't going to go away. Even after people hit herd immunity, COVID is still going to be a disease, but it won't be a public health emergency, and the spread will be much more controlled, because we won't be worrying about it landing on a vulnerable person, which then puts them in the hospital and then they die. So I think we will see benefits probably as we get into spring in terms of hospitalizations and deaths, and I think that will be something to celebrate.
Amish, thanks so much. Amish Adalja there of Johns Hopkins. Be sure to check out VRUS Go on the Bloomberg for the latest information. And of course, tune in every day for our exclusive conversation with Johns Hopkins experts for an inside look at battling COVID-19. Now, coming up, our Bloomberg editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, will speak with the Pfizer chairman and chief executive, Albert Bourla. That's at 8 a.m. in New York. That's 1 p.m. in London. And this is Bloomberg.
continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong, but it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, Tom Keene in New York. Now, the World Bank President, David Malpass, says it's a big challenge to ensure developing nations are able to access the COVID-19 vaccine. He spoke with the Carlyle co-founder, David Rubenstein, on the latest episode of the David Rubenstein Show peer-to-peer conversations.
These are big challenges. What we did as the World Bank in October, our board approved, and with the support of all these shareholder countries, the idea of $12 billion of financing. We can use that money to help set up vaccination systems in poor countries, also to buy vaccines from manufacturers, and also from COVAX, which is an international facility that's getting access to vaccines. So we're already in the process of deploying those vaccines. We've been working since October to do an assessment, one country at a time, and we've done now 96 assessments of their readiness to actually do the vaccines. The World Bank's been heavily involved in vaccination programs for many years, for decades, including polio and Ebola and measles and on down, HPV and AIDS, therapeutics. And so that the bank is able to help countries. Last week, we announced our first operation to buy vaccines and to begin the deployment of vaccines, and we'll have many more operations coming down the line now.
Tell us now, we're in the beginning of 2021. Is that going to be a good year for the global economy, or what are your biggest worries?
One thing that happened in 2020 was the world didn't slow as much as people had feared. And so the forecasts for 2021 are actually being brought down because the starting point was a little higher than expected. So I'm pretty cautious on 2021. I think a lot of countries are still in substantial trouble, and COVID is, as you know, is still very omnipresent around the world. So we've thought that a critical variable is to get vaccinations done for as many people as possible. That will help in the GDP outlook, in the growth outlook. Reopening schools is a critical variable because both from the education standpoint, also it enables people to be at their jobs working if the schools are open. So that's a key variable, and the World Bank is very involved in education. So all of those. Now, one thing I should mention is the inequality of the current world environment. It's troubling, and I think it's actually getting worse, which is a big challenge.
So are you?
Nice work, you guys. We close position at on Swissy, and that's it. You can calculate your nice profit based on the margin you trade on. Okay.
trying to catch up on getting advancement. Also, remittances have been down. That's the money that's sent back home by workers that are across their borders, outside their borders, and that's gone down a lot. So that's a big blow to the developing world. And then new investment simply has been much slower. One thing the World Bank has tried to do is supply, and I pushed in April of 2020 that we wanted to be in working capital and trade finance. This is the short end of what companies need in order to keep their private sector companies and businesses operating. And because the